Human groups are made of human systems. This show stands at the practical intersection of counterintelligence, trauma psychology, and systems thinking. My research focuses on how people, groups, and institutions lose the ability to see reality clearly, and what happens when decisions keep getting made anyway. I'm Kit Perez, and this has Changed the Game. Welcome back to Change the Game. I'm Kit Perez. Today I'm joined by Bruce Gudmunsson. He's a military historian, he's a former military officer, he's one of the clearest thinkers there are on how leaders actually learn to make decisions under pressure. His work focuses on command and combat learning and how judgment is developed through that experience rather than getting explained to. And what makes his perspective so different, and the main reason I wanted to have him on the show, is that he's not treating leadership as a personality trait or a moral posture. He treats it as a trainable skill and a perishable skill. It can be degraded or quietly selected out of systems that claim to value it. He works with decision games, which we're going to talk about in depth. And all of this matters because a lot of organizations say they want initiative and adaptability, or they even throw around the term mission command, the concept of decentralized leadership. But then they go and build environments that punish the very behaviors required to develop those very traits. And Bruce helps explain why that contradiction persists and what actually works instead. So today we're going to talk about judgment, friction, learning through error, and why you can't PowerPoint real competence. So to get started, Bruce, talk to me a little bit about what it is that you do.
So what I do is in various forms and formats and venues, I design and present decision games. Most of these are decision forcing case studies. That's to say, these are decision games that are based on real events. But sometimes I will do something with an element of imagination, an element of speculation in it. And what is a decision game? A decision game is an activity in which there is a presenter, a facilitator, a game master, if you will, somebody who tells a story, places the other participants in that story as the hero of the tale, as the protagonist. So the story is told in the second person. So we don't say, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We say the year is 1492, and you are Christopher Columbus. And here's what you see, here's what you hear, and what here's your, first of all, tell me what's going on here, and then tell me what you're going to do about it. And it's really that simple. It's a each of these is a game, a problem, I'll use the old German term, an assignment, an Aufgabe, right? That presents people with a problem. That problem is presented in the second person, not so-and-so is out there trying to solve the problem, but you are in that role. And what's your plan? And that leads to an open-ended discussion. There's no preset answer. In fact, even if the situation, the scenario is historical, there is obviously an historical outcome, but that's not the right answer. That's simply what happened. Right? People in the past often did things well and often did things poorly. So this is not an exercise in either matching a school solution or replicating history. The problem is historical, but the answer is very much up to each player.
I think that's one thing that I found on Saturday when I was there, obviously going in with some trepidation, not having combat experience, you kind of assume going into it that you need that. And instead, it was very fascinating to see that, like you say, it's not about replicating what they did, because even in some questions where I was absolutely certain that this is the right answer, obviously the person would have done this, then you find out that no, they did something entirely different, and you're able to go, wow. But it also, putting it in that second person format, it almost adds an emotional investment to it where, okay, I am this person. I have to take ownership of these decisions. I have to be able to show my work. And I think that simple facet of it really adds a dimension that wouldn't normally be there.
Yes, no, that emotional element, that degree of buy-in is a big part. All of a sudden, if again, if I say, in 1806 Napoleon did this, and you think, okay, well, that's interesting, but I don't, you know, 3 hours from now, I won't care. But if I say, you, Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, um, see this, and oh, by the way, you're betting your empire and probably your life on your decision. What do you do? All of a sudden, it's personal, and there's this emotional buy-in, which really concentrates the mind, wonderfully. I think, the thinkers of the Enlightenment thought that they could separate thought from emotion. I don't think human beings do that. I think we are complex creatures, and how we think is very much connected to how we feel. So when people are playing these games, they're playing them as whole people, as complete people, and people who, at least in their imaginations, have something at stake. They have skin in the game.
I think that plays into something that I talk about a lot, is that we can understand something intellectually. We can believe it intellectually and still act in the opposite way out of an emotional compulsion based on our own orientation, our own, like, and like you say, once you add that emotional ownership component to it, there's a certain point where no matter how much context you give, because you're also trying to prepare the mind to think as this person would have, you cannot separate your own stuff, so to speak, from the decision-making process. And I noticed this very strange hybrid effect happening in my own brain, if that makes any sense.
Oh yes, yes, no, and this was, and we're talking about um, a meeting of the Decision Game Club, which happened over Zoom on a recent Saturday.
And you do this every Saturday.
Yes, just about every Saturday. We're taking off Valentine's Day, but most Saturdays we get together, and there's a bunch of us that do it. Um, Sometimes I will present the case. Sometimes my colleagues Kevin and Kathleen will present a case.
So how would someone get into this? Like, first of all, what are the prerequisites that you would tell someone if I came to you as I did, knowing nothing about this? What would you say? Hey, here's what you need to bring to the table.
An internet connection and an open mind.
So you don't need any kind of experience in any given field. You just need to be able to think.
Yes, yes, and in fact, I find that the whole group benefits when people from different walks of life and different parts of the world and different perspectives come in and look at, everyone's looking at the same problem, but from a very different orientation, and that often leads to a very rich discussion.
I found Saturday's discussion very rich in that sense, where different people, like you say, they're bringing different orientations to the table. They're bringing different levels of experience, different fields that they work in. And even when you're discussing, for instance, a quote unquote ancient battle, and by ancient, I mean like, 200, 300 years, but people apply different generations of warfare to that scenario based on what they know.
Oh, very much so. Yes, yes, no, no, and they and it's interesting you bring in the word generations because I do this with people of various ages. So I teach undergraduates at Hampton-Sydney College, and that they're mostly of traditional undergraduate age. So 18, 19, 20, 21, thereabouts, and they will approach a problem in a certain way. The decision game club on Zoom tends to be had to have people with a wide variety of backgrounds. I often work with U.S. Marines who tend to be a little bit older than the college students. People in their late 20s, early 30s. So everyone's bringing something something a little bit different to the problem.
So, what would you say to someone? Because obviously, this has direct application for people in the military, but it also has application for someone who isn't in the military, who is maybe in a corporate environment, or maybe in, as we discussed before the show, in a resistance environment. What does it translate to in terms of skill sets for someone who is not looking to become a career officer or a career military personnel?
Well, very often the problems, or very rarely, will the problems be of a purely military technical nature. So the very often the problems faced by the decision makers are interpersonal problems. They're problems of information. They're problems of perspective. They're problems of relationships. And so they're I'll put things a little bit differently. Even if this is a tactical case in which the decision maker is a military person about to go into battle, the problems may include some military technical aspects, the range of a given weapon or something. But very often the problems are the sorts of problems people face in other walks of life. What am I trying to accomplish? Why am I here? Problems of relationships. What does my boss try to communicate? Am I communicating properly? How do I explain what's going on? How do I explain what I want done? How do I interpret evidence? Because the evidence is always imperfect. So these are things that we all deal with in all walks of life, and in fact, most of the people I who take part in decision games that I conduct, most of them are civilians, and very few of them actually have a military background. Again, the exception is when I work with U.S. Marines.
So essentially, what you're doing is you're teaching people not just to think, but to even go deeper than that and to think about how they're thinking.
Yes, yes. I wish that fellow had not ruined the word meta, because it's a perfectly good word, and there is a lot of thinking about thinking. There is a lot of metacognition going on, and a lot of reflection. Maybe reflection is a better word. Maybe he did us all a favor by ruining the word meta, so we focus on reflection.
So I want to use this to kind of segue then into, because in your decision games, military doctrine is not the focus, but for some people, for some participants, it plays a role, whether they realize it or not, because that's part of their orientation, what they've been taught in terms of doctrine. But in your work running these games, where do you find that the doctrine breaks down the most?
Yes, so doctrine's an interesting word, and it has two rather different meanings. One of them is doctrine as a cookbook. here is a book of recipes, and you follow the recipe and you get the result. That is, I think, a very dangerous thing for any organization, but particularly an organization that has to deal with uncertainty. The other one is doctrine, which is, again, I'll use that word meta, is how to think about the problems, how to approach the problems, how to keep an open mind, how to look at dynamic situations. So doctrine has two very, very different meanings. So if I may ask, are you thinking about the first sort of doctrine, the cookbook doctrine, or the more philosophical doctrine?
Well, it sounds like based on these definitions that cookbook doctrine would break down far faster than the second type that you're describing, which sounds a lot more like maybe a form of mission command.
Very much so, yes. And if I may tell a story, and this is one of the many paradoxes of this set of problems over the past couple hundred years. So in 1870, there's a war between France and Germany, and to everyone's surprise, Germany, which in those days was seen as this land of dreamy poets and hard to understand philosophers, defeats the French, and the French are the heirs of Napoleon. They are there. Everybody wants to be like the French in the military world, but the Germans beat the French, and the French come back and they lick their wounds and they say, "Okay, what happened? How did the Germans beat us?" And someone comes up with the idea: the Germans had unity of doctrine. Somehow they were all working together. They were cooperating, whereas we, with our, again, Napoleonic tradition, we're all going off in all sorts of different directions. So the French army comes up with, again, this idea of doctrine, and that is, for lack of a better word, this cookbook approach. And every time the doctrine runs afoul of reality, they rewrite it. But there's this idea that doctrine is something that is written by some very clever people in the center, and then distributed out to people out there who are going to apply it. And in World War I, the U.S. Army adopts this from the French, and this creates this cycle of doctrinaire thinking. And in the 80s, because of a number of experiences, one of which was the Vietnam War, one of which is the work of John Boyd, America's premier military philosopher, a lot of people, and I was one of them, give up on doctrine. We basically say, no, we want to forget the cookbook. Yes, we need philosophy, and that philosophy is going to look a lot like the message that John Boyd is spreading. But the cookbook, by the time that it's written up and edited and bound into a book, the recipe is obsolete. So this other approach, of which decision games I would propose, is decision games are a key part of this undoctrine, right? This doctrine of anti-doctrine. I don't mean to be obscure, but this other kind of doctrine, this more philosophical. Here's how to think. Prepare yourself for an endless series of surprises. Don't be surprised by surprise. One of the problems with the cookbook approach is that there is the people who who learn the recipes, they practice the recipes, and then they go out, they engage reality, and they suffer from this intense feeling of betrayal. They've been failed by the recipe, and the problem um, is with the recipe, right? They all feel failed by the organization, failed by their superiors, failed by their teachers. But really, the failure lies with the notion that you can reduce everything to a formula.
So that kind of plays into then the next question I was going to ask is why is it that militaries and these large institutions have to relearn the same lessons? And it sounds like they're operating from a cookbook that limits the options as, misorientation does. And then when the actual situation happens outside of the options that they're familiar with, they don't know what to do and they shut down.
Yes, yes, and there's a number of reasons for this. One is that the worst thing a military organization can do is not lose. Right? Losing is bad. The worst thing a military organization can do is lose discipline. So if you have a country, right? This is the you know this is the land of Kit, and you're the queen of the land of Kit, and you have an army. Yes, you want your army to win, but the worst thing that can happen is the army to show up at your palace and say, "Sorry, Your Majesty, you're not queen anymore." And so there's this high premium on discipline and loyalty. And to do that, you have to inculcate certain values and habits. But when you try to employ that same mentality, which again is essential to a realm of conflict, that's when problems start. And this is why the military mind must be schizophrenic. Right? To be a good soldier, you have to, on the one hand, you have to be loyal, right? Marines say semper fidelis, always loyal. But on the other hand, you have to be very flexible and open-minded. And that's something that requires a lot of practice. And that's, I think, where the decision games come in.
So let's take this into practical terms, regardless of what field someone is operating in. How would they be able to take this back to that field and say, I guess the question is, how would someone know if they're using cookbook doctrine or orientation doctrine?
Yeah, I think that well, obviously, if you're using a cookbook doctrine, you're saying things like, well, this worked yesterday, or
Mm,
these are the rules, or this is how it's always been done. Even though if you've uh, spent any time with old cookbooks, you know that things were not always done that way. So the cookbook for the wood-fired stove is very different from the cookbook for the microwave.
right.
Right. Uh, but I think you could almost always tell where you have somebody telling you, "I know this doesn't make sense, but this is how we've always done it."
Mm.
Right? Um,
So
the
there's certain phrases then that you can look for, that being one of them, that, hey, if somebody's saying these things, your brain should start saying, hey, we may be operating on cookbook basis as opposed to a proper orientation to the reality that is.
Yes, yeah, and you'd hear these phrases, particularly the in World War II. So there's the phrase, "the right way, the army, the right way, the wrong way, and the army way."
Mm.
Or this is the phrase Herman Wouk, the novelist who wrote The Caine Mutiny about the U.S. Navy in World War II, talks about the Navy as this institution designed by geniuses to be run by idiots. That that notion that all the intelligence is at the center or at the top of the hierarchy, um, that there is um, some great and powerful Oz who is working everything from behind the curtain. Uh, if if you have that, you know you're first of all you know you're in trouble, and you know you're in a system that can't adapt. Inherent in the decision game philosophy, the practice, the culture of decision games, is the idea that the people making the most important decisions are out there um, at the where the rubber meets the road. They are let's say you're in the retail business. Um, the most important person in that business is the person helping the customer,
Right.
and you want that person helping the customer um, to be empowered. And I've occasionally done some decision games for businesses, and often I'll start off with a very simple customer service problem, and I know I'm in a healthy environment where when the participants can say, "Oh yeah, no, this is not in the rules, but I'm going to do this to take care of the customer because I want that customer to come back." Um, so uh, I think I'm to answer your question about the the civilian use of this technique. I think it's very valuable for any situation in which um, there's a dynamic situation with dynamic problems when things are unexpected, when opportunities pop up, when crises pop up, when there's anything that's not perfectly predictable.
So what you're describing then is implicit guidance and obviously a huge part of mission command. And you're setting those outward boundaries that look, these are the lines, they're clearly defined. These are the goals, these are the things that we say we are and we practice. And within that box, you can operate however it is that you wish, even if it quote unquote violates the rules.
Yes, yes, and we're talking about high trust environments
Mhm.
where you presume that the people making the decisions at the forward edge, at the point at which decisions matter, that you presume that they have the best interest of the organization at heart. They're trying to do the right thing, and also that they have the best information. That by the time the information filters its way through, excuse me, any sort of organization, you're going to lose you're going to lose a lot of information. But the person uh, at the sharp edge, um, he has he knows lots of things, even if he's not able to express it. That's the other thing, is that the very often the knowledge possessed by the decision maker is something that he can't express. Though one of the things we do with decision games is practice that that art of explaining what's going on and um, what we plan to do.
So it sounds then, because I was going to ask, what is a way, or what does the way that an organization is structured tell you about what it expects to face? Because it sounds like what it expects to face and what it's actually facing on the ground, regardless of the type of organization we're talking about, there's a gap there. And from what you're saying, the person on the ground can't always explain to the chain on the way up what it's facing and why he needs to do X decision. So when an organization is structured a certain way, it's telling you this is the type of situation we expect you to be in. But isn't that kind of a de facto indication that they're operating from a cookbook basis?
Well, I think if you've seen my Substack, I love a good organizational chart. Um, I doodle organization charts for fun, but I think what's really important in the organization is not the formal who reports to whom, but the culture. How people are talking to each other, who may talk to whom. Now, if you have people who are insisting that who are trying to limit communication, that's usually a bad sign. Um, yes, you want to have a chain of command that in which everyone gets informed as soon as possible, but uh, the important thing here is again not the formal layout of boxes, but really do people feel feel safe? Number one, do they feel safe telling the truth? Um, do they feel safe communicating? Do they feel safe doing the right thing? Even though they don't have explicit permission to do that. It's things like that that are much more important than the the organigram.
So you're not actually arguing here for, the CEO of a company to have a quote unquote open door policy in which the newly hired shipping clerk can just call him up and start talking to him about problems. You're actually advocating for a culture that allows for that shipping clerk to stand up and say, hey, this is unethical, or have you ever thought about doing this, or this isn't working for us on the ground, even though it sounds really good in your office.
Yes, yeah. I think that the it's not a I'm not arguing for a kind of open door monarchy where everybody talks to the boss, the one boss, and then the boss makes up his mind and then promulgates his orders. I'm talking about a culture where everybody's talking all the time, and these communications are happening in all sorts of ways and all sorts of directions, and people are going. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that," or "Oh, let's try that." That kind that kind of culture. So yeah, I think an open door is probably a good idea, but there's much more to it than that.
So you're really advocating for normalizing friction.
Oh, friction's friction's there. Friction's everywhere. There's lots and lots of friction, and you're not going to uh, eliminate it. You want to, first of all, you want to expect it, so it doesn't throw you off your game. So the if you're taught, again, going back to the idea of the cookbook, if you've got your cookbook and it says, preheat your oven to 350, and you're camping and you're trying to cook over a fire or with a Dutch oven or something, and you don't know what 350 looks like. Um, if you're in this decision game culture, I'll call it this mission command culture, you'll work that out. If you're in the cookbook culture, the fact that you don't have little red LEDs that tell you when you've reached 350 degrees, that can be um, a problem. So the first thing is not to expect the absence of friction, and that's one of the reasons I have I like decision games of all sorts, but I have a preference for those based on real events because the friction is there. In fact, in real events, there's so much friction that that if you made it up, if you put that degree of friction into a fictional game, the players will think that you're messing with them. They'll see this as part of the harassment package. Whereas if you look at um, any account of real events, there is so much friction. Whereas there is if you look at a lot of fictional decision games that have been used through the years, it's always, it's a beautiful day. The birds are singing. The sun is shining. It's 70 degrees. Your canteens are full. Everyone had a good breakfast, and you get this perfectly formatted order with all the information you need. And that, that almost never happens.
Never happens.
Never
Right, right.
happens. So why practice it that way? Why teach people that there's going to be this ideal when this ideal will never happen? Why not start with friction and remind them every moment that friction is their constant companion?
So I kind of want to shift just slightly. It sounds so simple, right? When we talk about this, it sounds like, well, duh, of course we would want to do it this way. But what prevents that real learning from sticking? What's getting in the way?
Oh, all sorts of things. And this is something that I face the I face the temptation on a daily basis is the desire to make things simpler, and particularly the desire to make things simpler for the participants. So anytime that I'm putting a problem together, I'm tempted to well, I'll provide more information. I'll do a little more research, and I'll give the players a better map than the real person had at the time. So I think that that's a very human tendency. And so the human tendency to want to make things, we want to make things better. That's a good thing, right? Um, but sometimes we see the friction and we take out that that quart of motor oil and slather it all over the machinery just so it works more smoothly.
Well, I mean, how many movies have been made on the premise that some entity decided to make human systems easier or better, or we wanted to eradicate war and then this happened, and the law of unforeseen consequences and all of these things. So it sounds like people want to meddle.
Well, yeah. And again, this is something this human desire to make things better. But I think no, I think a lot of it is the desire to make things better, but also there's this desire, things like the desire for standardization. We want everything to be the same, and there are wonderful benefits to standardization. Imagine trying to file away papers of all different sizes, right? In you know, so or even the problems we have connecting our electronics with connectors of different types um,
One
so
remote to rule them all.
yes. So again, we're living at the end of the machine age, right? We the world in which we live was shaped by machines, and machines depend upon things like standardization and reliability. And all those things, they're incredibly powerful. Um, and so much of what we have in organizations is the result of the desire to replicate the virtues of a machine in places where really machines don't belong. We're pushing the machine beyond its capability, and you see this a lot with people in the 18th century, people in the 19th century, early 20th century. The ideal is the clockwork. We want things. We have the expression. It worked like clockwork. And again, for certain things like keeping time, clockwork is wonderful. But again, we have this desire to standardize, and for that, for a lot of people, standardization is a tool that allows them to control, or at least pretend that they're controlling, or feel that they're controlling. So there's a lot of temptations there.
So what happens then? You talk about standardization, which kind of goes hand in hand with specialization, right? It's like two sides of the same coin. What happens when an organization tries to make everybody do everything in the interest of standardization?
Well, there is a yeah. First of all, there's the belief that if we standardize procedures, um, then people can learn the procedures quickly, and that those procedures can be a substitute for expertise.
But that
And
doesn't require thinking, though.
yes, yes, yes. So there again, there's this desire to uh, replace the complex and the human with the simple and mechanical. But no, there is this. It's interesting if you look at decision game cultures. There is an enormous emphasis on experience, both actual and vicarious, right? The experience gained through various simulations. So the uh, so in a sense, where that this decision game culture that I'm talking about is something that is exists at the point where the machine no longer works, right? There's again, machines do certain things well, but lots of things not well, and that's where humans come in. And
And
so,
and human systems have humans in them.
yes. And so here is a paradox for you, if I may, and is that these decision games we've been talking about, including war games, because wars involve people, they are a part of the humanities. They are part of people studying people trying to make sense of themselves and each other.
If someone is coming from a civilian perspective, as most of my readers are, what would you tell them about, like, how do they take this entire conversation and say, okay, I want to put this to work right now, maybe not, individually or personally, but in my organization? Obviously, you want them to start doing decision games and learning that culture, which they can find on your Substack and become a paid subscriber and do all that. But what principles do you want them to take as they shut off this podcast and go back into their life?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to do it. One is to read memoirs. So, if and again, whatever field you're in, read memoirs of people in that field and also people in other fields. And as you read the memoir, every time the autobiographer hits a problem, stop reading and think, what would I do? Make a habit of that. Put yourself in the position of that other person, and then once you've come up with your plan, then compare it to what actually happened.
And not from a perspective of was I good enough or was I right, but just, okay, what are the differences and why?
Precisely, precisely. So that is the first habit. It's a and it's interesting in the 19th century. You would occasionally find, actually, even in the 20th century, people who would write that way. And even there's one fellow with the wonderfully musical name of Julius von Verdi du Vernois.
My goodness.
Yes, yes, Julius, to his very close friends, he would write a book. He would write books where he'd describe a situation, and every once in a while would stop the action to give the readers a chance to come up with their own solutions. In a sense, there's a famous book written by George C. Marshall, George C. Marshall, of the Marshall Plan. But when he's a younger person, he was a great proponent of the decision forcing case, of the historical decision game. He called them historical map problems, and he organized a little book of such problems called Infantry in Battle. It's an absolute classic. First edition came out in 1934. Marine Corps republished it in 1989 as part of this renaissance I was talking about earlier. But so yeah, that's the first thing you can do is read differently. And of course, memoirs are best for this, but also any biography or a good history that talks about people making decisions as opposed to great impersonal forces. So that's my first bit of advice. My second bit of advice is think about joining us for our Zoom sessions. If you'd like to do that, go to my Substack, the Tactical Notebook, and if you sign up as a paid subscriber, you're more than welcome to join us, and there'll be an email you can send a message to, and you get on the mailing list for our sessions. And the mailing list will have the links to the Zoom codes. So, and again, we have people from all walks of life, and all I ask is an open mind and basic good manners. I've been doing this since 2016, actually 2019 on Zoom, but 2016 as a club at the Marine Corps Staff College. But I've only had to kick one person out. Only had to ban one person, which I think for the internet is probably a record.
I think you might be correct. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on and for putting up with the ridiculous power outages that I am experiencing today.
Well, again, it's a wonderful. First of all, thank you for having me. It's been delightful, and if at the risk of being a little over optimistic, I think the power outages remind us that friction is everywhere.
Amen to that.
All right, let's close this one out. If there's one thread running through this conversation, it's that thinking clearly under pressure is a trained discipline, and most systems quietly train it out of people. What Bruce laid out through his decision games and historical analysis is something that gets missed in modern leadership culture. Judgment is built through exposure to friction, not through explanation. You don't learn how to decide by someone telling you the right answer. You do learn by being forced to choose with incomplete information, and then being allowed to see the consequences of your choice. And that's where decision games matter. They're orientation tools. They force you to surface assumptions and confront the trade-offs and commit to an action without certainty. In other words, they train the part of leadership that most organizations say they want and then punish. Bruce's work also exposes a deeper failure: systems that claim to value initiative and adaptability, but then refuse to tolerate the discomfort required to develop those things. If leaders are never allowed to be wrong in public, they never learn how to be right under pressure. And if mistakes are career-ending, people stop experimenting. And what's striking here is how transferable this is. This isn't just about military units or staff rides. These same dynamics show up in civilian leadership, organizations, activist movements, creative work, even resistance. Anywhere judgment is required and error is punished, orientation will drift and your decision quality will collapse. So the takeaway is that if you want better leaders, you have to build systems that allow people to practice judgment without risk to their identity. If you're listening to this and frustrated by leaders who can explain doctrine but can't act when the conditions change, the problem is orientation. Train it deliberately or lose by default.